The sun had barely risen, but the desert already burned like a furnace lit by God's own anger. It shimmered of the horizon like the breath of a dying world, and the sky was a cruel white blood cutting through endless dust. A lone rider tore through the wasteland, a woman dressed in black, her soul weeping behind her like a flag of defiance. Her horse stumbled over stones and bones alike, lungs having foam fleck in its mouth. But still, she rode, because behind her, the ad was coming. The shouts echoed first, distant, scattered, then the gunfire. A dry crack that shattered the silence of the dunes. Isabel didn't look back. She couldn't. She desintered faces before. The bandoleros her father had warned her of, men who sold fear for gold. But fear was not what drove her now. It was something deeper. Something grew. As a dove swooped across the sand, a hawk, circling lazily above, as though waiting for her to fall. Her heart beat faster. Her throat burned. The mare stumbled once, twice, and Isabel bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. She leaned low, whispering into the animal's ear. Just a little more, girl. Just a little more. Then, a shot rang out. The bullet hissed past her ear, tearing a chunk of leather from the saddle. The sounds wrapped through her nerves like lightning. She screamed, yanked the reins, and felt the horse lurch. Ahead, theirs dropped into a gash, a ravine, the pan jagged, carved by centuries of floods. She barely managed to stop in time. The men were close now. Their laughter carried through the wind. Come out, señora, one called, his voice cruel, amused. You can't run from justice. Justice. The word almost made her laugh. 3 riders emerged from the haze, their faces hidden by wide-brimmed hats, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. The leader, a tall man with a scar cutting his lip in half, dismounted slowly. His boots sank into the dust with a measured rhythm. It didn't ruse. It didn't need to. Enough the road said. A woman alone in the desert, what did you think would happen? Isabel raised the pistols she'd been clutching since dawn. Her hands trembled, but she met his gaze with steel in her eyes. Stay back. Scarlet grinned. How many bullets left, niña? She knew. 1. The last one. She could shout him, and deal with the others, bullets in her back. Or she could let them take her. Both fates felt the same. Scarlet took another step. You wanted to eat, said softly. You people never do. Her finger froze on the trigger. For one terrible second, I believed him. And then the air whistled. A black feathered arrow cut through the air, silent and sudden. It struck the man's shoulder, spinning him halfway around before it hit the ground. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Apache, one of the men shouted, fumbling for his rifle. He's got an Apache with him. Before they could them, another arrow flew, then another. Fast, precise. One horse reared, throwing its rider. Another man dropped his weapon and bolted. Within seconds, the desert swallowed their panic. When the dust cleared, Isabel was alone again. Alone, except for the shadow standing between her and the sun. It sat astride a black horse, silent and still. His skin was bronzed, his hair dark, tied back with leather. His bound loosely in one hand, a knife glinted at his waist. His eyes, calm and unreadable, studied her like one might study the edge of a blade. It dismounted slowly. Are you he? Isabel could barely find her voice. No. It looked toward the dead bandolero, then at her again. You shouldn't travel alone. You shouldn't appear out of nowhere. She shot back, trying to sound brave. He said nothing. He picked up a flying canteen and tossed it lightly to her horse. There is a mission north. Follow the tracks. You will find water there. Before she could thank him, he turned his horse. What? She called. Who are you? He paused, half turned. The rising sun from dimming gold. Someone who shouldn't be seen, he said, and vanished into the canyon. By on, the bells of the mission rang, echoing through the valley. When Isabel reached the fort, the soldiers stopped what they were doing to stare. Her black dress was torn and her hair wailed, a scandal wrapped in dust. The whispers began before she even crossed the gate. Her father, Coronel Ariza, stood waiting. His uniform gleamed, his boots shone, and his expression could have frozen the desert itself. You ran again, he said. From what? From en who thought it was properties, he replied. Then stop reading when mistake you for one of them, he said sharply. The soldiers looked away, pretending to be busy. Isabel bit her tongue to keep from saying more. Defying him here was suicide, not with words, but with reputation. That night, her stepmother, Doña Teresa, brushed the dust from her hair and whispered, "You cannot keep provoking him. Don Esteban expects your answer on." Don Esteban, Isabel repeated, her voice low. The man who buys favors with blood. "Is powerful," Teresa said, "and kin to your father." "Kindness born of greed," Isabel murmured. Doña Teresa said, looking away. "You could learn to love him." "He could learn to die," Isabel said softly. The days that followed brought new whispers. Soldiers talked of a stranger seen near the cliffs, half Indian who spoke like a Spaniard, who carried himself like a soldier but dressed like a ghost. On Sunday, under the shadow of the chapel's stone bell tower, Isabel entered mass as if walking into judgment. Her face was calm, her dress perfect, the very image of obedience. Then she saw him. Standing at the back of the church, in the dim light that could through the stained glass, was the man from the desert. The stranger. Nahuel stood with his head bowed, hands clasped, posture humble yet restless, like a man unsure if God would ever forgive him for existing. Their eyes met only once. But once was enough. Her breast caught. The walls seemed to close in. She turned her gaze to the altar, but her heart beat like a drum. The priest's voice rang out, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." She wondered, wildly, if he meant it. When the mass ended, people parted around Nahuel like water avoiding a stone. Whispers trailed behind him, half-blood savage soldent be here. Then, a cry. A child trapped beneath a collapsing cart near the well. Men shouted, pulling at the wooden frame. Isabel didn't think. She ran. Before she reached it, Nahuel was already there. He knelt beside the wheel, his strength calm and precise. Together, without speaking, they lifted. The wood cracked. The child rolled free, gasping in his mother's arms. The square fell silent. Dust floated through the air like us. Isabel's hand brushed Nahuel's. For one fleeting heartbeat, the world narrowed. Only their eyes, their breaths, the weight of everything inside. Then came the murmurs. The coronel's daughter. With him. Don Esteban stood across the square, face like marble, eyes burning cold. By dusk, gossip spread faster than wildfire. Women at the well whispered. Men laughed behind closed doors. They seized fallen for the savage. And somewhere in the distant hills, Nahuel sat beneath the fading sun, staring at the same heroism side it, and wondering whether what had begun in fear and danger would lead them to salvation or ruin. The church bell tolled midnight, but its echo carried a strange kind of warning, one that only two hearts scared. Isabel pressed herself against the cold stone of the chapel wall, her breast shallow, her pulse louder than the night crickets. The wind whispered through the trees like gossip, like sin itself washing. From the shadows, Nahuel appeared, silent as a ghost, yet more alive than anything she had ever known. His coat was torn, his hands still dirty from the fields. But his eyes, those eyes burned with something neither timid nor cold extinguished. "Someone will see you, she whispered. "Then let them," he said, voice low, almost trembling. The world was asleep, but the fear between them had long since awoken. Their meetings became a pattern the stars themselves seemed to keep. Every night, when the fort dimmed and the guards grew lazy with drink, Isabel found her way to the chapel or the river bank. Nahuel would already be there, sometimes sharpening a blade, sometimes sketching patterns in the sand with a stick, as though the river were his confessional. He never asked her why she came, and she never asked what a risk to be there. They didn't need to. In every glance, every wordless touch, they understood. This was love born in defiance. He would tell her stories in fragments, of his mother's people, the apache who lived by moonlight and silence, of his father, a Spanish trader who taught him letters and sham in equal measure. He was a man of two worlds, and yet accepted by neither. Isabel would listen. Her hand grasping his as though that contact might pull her from the suffocating web of her own world, the stiff dresses, the stiffer rules, the endless eyes that watched and yelled. One night by the river, I asked softly, "Do you ever wish you were someone else?" "No," said after a long pause. "Only that I could be myself without fear." The honesty struck her like lightning. She had been raised among men who wore masks of virtue but hearts of ambition. Nahuel's truth frightened her, not because it was wild, but because it was pure. But purity, in a place like San Almas, was never safe. Rumors began as whispers. A servant saw them by the chapel. A soldier claimed Nahuel lingered near the coronel's estate too often. Don Esteban, greedy for Isabel's hand and the power it promised, turned those whispers into poison. He laughed in the cantina one night, loud enough for everyone to hear. The Savage believes himself a gentleman now. Perhaps next day he won't sit at my table. The laughter that followed was cruel, echoing through the mud streets like gunfire. When the story reached Coronel Ariza, it struck like a bullet to his pride. His daughter, the jewel of his honor, spoken of in the same breath as a half-blood rift, carried her to his study, his voice quiet, his eyes harder than the medals on his chest. "You will not speak to him again," he said. She tried to reason, but her words scattered under his stare. "Do you hear me, Isabel?" She nodded, but inside her, something cracked. That night, she prayed, though she didn't know to whom. She prayed for strength, for forgiveness, for a sign that what she felt wasn't wicked. But even the sons on the chapel walls looked down at her with disapproval carved into their faces. The next day, Nahuel sought counsel from Father Alonso. The old priest listened in silence, fingers tightening around the wooden cross he wore. "My heart burns for her," Nahuel confessed, his voice breaking. "And I know the world will not forgive me. But what if the fire itself was not sent by the devil? What if it was God's test, to see if love can survive hate?" The priest said, "Son, sometimes love is not forbidden because it is wrong, but because men have made it so. You must choose which God you serve, theirs or your own heart." Nahuel left the confessional with more torment than peace. But when he saw Isabel again, under the moonlit fountain in the plaza, his doubt turned to certainty. The fountain was old, cracked, chipped, forgotten. Water whispered from its mouth like a secret. She stood there in a white soul, her hair loose, her face glowing like the kind of holiness no church could define. "I can't keep hiding," she said, voice shaking. "My father has guards watching me. They think I've sinned." "You haven't," he said. "But they will make me believe I have." A step closer, his hand brushing hers. "Then believe me instead." The silence between them thickened, the air heavy with everything unspoken, everything forbidden. The night pressed closer, holding its breath. And then, as if drawn by something ancient and unchangeable, she lifted her face to his. The kiss came slowly, not gentle, but deliberate, as if both knew this was the moment their lives would split in two. The water rippled, the months wad, and for an instant, the world ceased to exist. Only the ache of skin and the trembling of souls remained. When they finally pulled apart, Isabel's tears mixed with the fountain's spray. "They will come for you," she whispered. "I know." "Then run." "No. Not this time." He looked at her with the steady calm of someone who had lived his whole life, hunted and yet refused to hide. "I've run from everything, my name, my blood, my place. But not from you." In the distance, a bell rang, a sound of warning, or perhaps fast striking its first note. Over the following days, the town grew feverish with rumor. Women clutched their rosaries tighter, men spat on the ground when Nahuel passed. Eventos who once greeted him with politeness now avoided his eyes. Isabel, locked inside her father's house, felt the walls closing in. Letters smuggled by servants became their only lifeline, words trembling with passion and fear. Asterisco we will live on. Meet me at the old well beyond the vineyards asterisco. That was his last note. But fat, ever cruel, had been listening to. Don Esteban, drunk on power and humiliation, para soldier to intercept the message. By the time Nahuel read the well, it was not greeted by Isabel's trembling hands, but by the sharp echo of boots and the gleam of bayonets under torchlight. He escaped that night through the ravine, his arm bleeding from a rifle shot, his heart heavier than the desert stone beneath his feet. Isabel, imprisoned in her chamber, pressed her ear to the window bars and swore she heard the distant gallop of his horse, fading into darkness like a promise unfinished. In the town square, Don Esteban Rasgis Glassant declared, "The Savage has gone. Order is restored." But in the quiet corners of San Almas, under the same moon that had witnessed their forbidden kiss, something sacred and dangerous still lingered. Love had crossed the moral line. And now, neither heaven nor the laws of men could undo what had begun. The desert never sleeps. It only waits, patient, cruel, listening to the lies men tell themselves and the secrets they bury beneath its dust. That night, beneath a swollen red moon, it listened again. Coyotes slinked between the rocks, their yellow eyes gleaming as Don Esteban met Vargas and his hired men at the edge of the canyon. They reeked of smoke and deceit. A single lantern swung from a wagon post, its light dancing across rifles stacked like silent witnesses. Esteban unrolled a weathered map over the hood of the wagon. His gold ring caught the lantern light with every gesture. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting. "The coronel believes the Apaches are planning another attack," he said. "We will have a improve." Vargas, squat and scarred, spat into the dirt. "You won't fear? We burned their camp to the ground." Esteban's lips curved into something colder than a smile. "Not used burn, erase. Leave nothing but bones and smoke. And make sure this is found among the ashes." He held up a knife, Nahuel's knife. The carved bone handle glinted like a confession waiting to be heard. Vargas hesitated. "The Alfredes got friends at the fort. Sab the colonel's daughter, they say." "Then this," Esteban said, his voice turning to Ise, "will save us from him. When the soldiers find that bloody, they see what they already fear, that savages can't be trusted." Silence fell. The men exchanged glances. Gold made them brave, but guilt made them quiet. In the desert, silence was as good as consent. Way down, the hills above the river glowed with fire. Smoke coiled into the pale sky like a serpent. The Apache settlement burned. Huts, totems, the fragile lives of a people who had already been exiled by history. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, blood, and ruin. Nahuel was gone when it began, treading horses near the fort. When he saw the black column of smoke rising beyond the ridge, he spurred his horse harder. But by the time he reached the valley, it was too late. Flames still leaked at the remnants. The world had known lay in us. Mothers wept beside the bodies of children. The ground itself seemed to mourn. And there, half buried in the dirt, gleamed a knife. His knife. He picked it up slowly, the reflection in the blood trembling like a ghost and sure it still existed. Whatever mercy had once lived in inflicted, fragile and uncertain. At the fort, Vargas delivered his story. His uniform was inked, his hands still blackened from the fire he had set. "We found this," he said, placing Nahuel's knife before the coronel. "Tracks leading east, toward his people. All 4 patrol dead. The rest, slaughtered." Coronel Ariza stared at the bloody, yellow-tight, eyes like stone. In his world, there was no space between loyalty and treason. "Bring him to me," he said at last. "Alive or dead." From her window, Isabel heard the words. The echo of command. The rasp of rifles being cleaned. The thud of boots and the snores of restless horses. It all felt like thunder before a storm. Her father's storm. Her heart hammered. She tore the silver cross from her neck, her last piece of innocence, and pressed it into the stable boy's hand. "You never saw me," she whispered. Moments later, she rode into the darkness. The desert opened before her, vast and merciless. The wind clawed at her cloak, lightning split the horizon, and the storm followed her like fate itself. Her mare stumbled but did not fall. Isabel pressed on, driven by love, by fear, by something larger than both, the need for truth before it died. When she reached the canyon, the dawn was cold and gray. Nahuel stood among the ruins, his face scarred from grief. The fear had hollowed him out, left veined only rage and silence. "They've blamed you," she said, breathless. "My father's coming. I think you led the attack." I looked toward the horizon, where the dust was already rising. "Soldiers. Is all they've known," I murmured. "Vargas offered us a rifles, spoke of peace. I believed him. Fool that I am. Then run," I begged. "Now, before they arrive." I shook his head. "If I run, I die a criminal. If I stay, maybe someone will hear the truth." "Tenía I stay too." I reached out, brushing her cheek. "You've already reached enough." "I don't care." I smiled, sorrow softening the edges of his face. "I do." The ground trembled. Oves. Rifles. The soldiers rode in, a tide of iron and judgment. At their head, Coronel Ariza, rigid in his saddle, the sanglinting of his medals. Nahuel stepped forward, palms open, his voice cutting through the canyon wind. "I did not kill your men. I did not burn these homes. Look around. Do these ashes look like victory to you?" "Silence," the Coronel barked. "You dare deny what's before me." "What you see," Nahuel said, "is what Esteban wanted you to see." The Coronel's hand twitched toward his revolver. But before the bullet came, another sound tore through the air, a shot from the cliffs. A soldier dropped, screaming. "Ambush," someone shouted. Then chaos swallowed the canyon. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Vargas and his men, hidden among the rocks, fired into both sides. Dust and smoke rose until the world turned red. Horses reared, men fell, screams tangled with thunder. The canyon became a slaughterhouse of confusion. Nahuel dragged Isabel behind a boulder, shielding her with his body. "They want no survivors," he said. "No truth." A fire toward the ridge, one shot, then another. 2 mercenaries fell. But the bullets kept coming. Stones shattered around them. Smoke beat their throats. And through it all, Esteban watched from afar, untouched, mounted on a black horse, the architect of ruin surveying his masterpiece. Their eyes met. Nahuel raised his rifle, but before a cold fire, the impact came, a shot tearing through his side. Staggered, blood blooming against his shirt like a black flower. Isabel's scream cut through the storm. She caught him before he fell, pressing her hands against the wound. "Stay with me." He pushed her gently behind him, still lambing toward the ridge. "Down," he gasped. "Stay down." Below, the Coronel saw it, his daughter kneeling beside the man he had condemned, the one now bleeding to protect her. His heart faltered. Pride cracked. The world they built on certainty began to crumble. He spurred his horse forward, charging through the chaos. When he reached them, Isabel turned to him, her eyes blazing through her tears. "Look at him," she cried. "He's dying for you, for the men you sent here." Nahuel smiled weakly, breast shallow. "Because she saw me. Not what he was told to be, what he could be." Behind them, Vargas tried to flee. The Coronel rose, drew his revolver, and fired once. Vargas fell. Justice, brutal and too late, struck him down. Esteban turned to run, but the surviving soldiers followed. Minutes later, a single shot echoed through the canyon. The desert attacked him too. Nahuel's breast grew thin. Isabel held him close, her hands trembling. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave me." He looked at her, eyes soft even as the light dimmed. "Tell them, it wasn't Teja that killed us. It was Pride." Then his eyes closed. The silence that followed was heavier than any thunder. The Coronel bowed his head. His medals gleamed in the sun, not as honor, but as sham. Around them, the canyon smoldered. Smoke rose like prayers that would never be answered. And below, the river carried away the ashes, winding through the desert like memory itself. The rain began before dawn, soft and relentless, like the earth itself mourning. The canyon still smoked from the night before, their sick with gunpowder, as, and prayers that came too late. Isabel knelt beside Nahuel, her hands stained with his blood, her hair clinging to her face as the storm gathered above them. The world had gone silent, the guns, the shouting, the fury, all drowned beneath the rhythm of his fading breath. opened his eyes once more. His voice barely more than wind. Now they will see, whispered. Love leaves no enemy. Isabel pressed her forehead to his chest, the words sinking into her like a final bow. His blood mixed with the rain, red and holy, soaking into the soil that had rejected him all his life. When his body went still, it was as though the storm itself paused to listen, and then, as if unable to bear the silence, the heavens wept harder. Coronel Ariza stood a few paces away, the weight of his own armor turning him into a stone. His soldiers waited for orders that would never come. Stepped forward, his boots sinking into the mud, and looked down at the man who had saved his life. The same man had called a disgrace, a savage, an unworthy stand on his name. He removed his hat slowly, kneeling beside the body. His hand trembled as it touched Nahuel's shoulder. "I was blind," he murmured. "God forgive me. I was blind." Isabel didn't look up. Her voice was broken, raw. "I needed your mercy, not your forgiveness." The coronel had no reply. There were no commands, no orders, no laws left to hide behind. He used a father, kneeling beside the ruin of his pride. The rain washed the medals on his chest until they gleamed like mockery. By noon, the surviving soldiers carried Nahuel's body back to the fort. They laid him in the chapel, the same chapel where he and Isabel had first met in secret. The candles flickered weakly against the damp air. Father Alonso stood before the altar, his voice shaking as he prayed, but even he could not find words that fit. The man before them had been condemned, hunted, and yet had died, saving to say who hated him. What scripture could explain that? The coronel ordered that Nahuel be buried with honor, but Isabel refused. "He will not rest in the ground that cursed him," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "He belongs to the river." Word spread through the town, of the ambush, of Vargas' treachery, of Esteban's lies. The once proud rancher was dragged through the plaza in chains, his fine clothes torn, his face pale with rage. The people who had toasted him now turned away, muttering curses. In the barracks courtyard, under the eyes of the soldiers had deceived, Don Esteban passed his judgment. The coronel stood before him, silent. There was no trial, no speeches, only a single command. The rifles lifted. Esteban's mouth twisted into a smile, cruel, defiant to the last. "You will never erase the stand, Spat. You can bury me, but you can't bury what I made them see." The shots rang out. He fell backward into the dust. The rain stopped. When the sun broke through, it came not as worms but as revelation. The fort was quieter now, humbled, hollowed out. Men moved like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones, as if afraid of waking the dead. Isabel remained in the chapel for hours, her fingers tracing the beads of her rosary, though no prayers escaped her lips. Her father came once, standing at the door, but she did not turn. The distance between them was no longer made of walls or words, it was made of truth. At dusk, she placed her hand on Nahuel's chest one last time, her whisper barely audible. "You kept your promise. You made them see." The next morning, she rode out alone, carrying a small urn wrapped in a faded red cloth, the color of blood, of desert fire, of him. The soldiers watched her go but did not speak. Even the coronel, standing on the fort's balcony, could not bring himself to call her back. The river lay quiet when she reached it, the same river that had once witnessed her sham, her rebellion, her first spark of love. The water shimmered under the rising sun, calm, almost forgiving. She dismounted and walked to the edge, her boots sinking into the wet sand. "This is where it began," she whispered. The wind stirred her hair as I opened the urn. The ashes caught the light, grey and soft, swirling like smoke. She poured them into the current. For a moment, they floated, forming strange, fleeting shapes, then disappeared beneath the surface, carried away to places neither of them would ever see. She stood there for a long time, her reflection wavering in the ripples. Somewhere upstream, a hawk cried, a sound sharp enough to pierce the quiet. Behind her, Father Alonso approached on horseback. He dismounted slowly, watching in silence. "You have given him peace," he said. "No," she replied. "He gave it to me." The priest looked at her with something between awe and sorrow. The people will talk. They already do. Let them, I said. They always did. That night, the town of San Almas gathered for a final prayer. The chapel bells rang, but their tone was softer, almost mournful. Father Alonso spoke of redemption, of mercy-born true love, of sins that were not sins at all. And though many nodded, others simply stared, unable to understand. Isabel stood apart, her cloak drawn tight, her face half-hidden. When the ceremony ended, she turned toward the door. The coronel was waiting there, hat in hand, eyes heavy with something closer to humility. "Where will you go?" he asked. She met his gaze, and for the first time, saw in her not a daughter to protect, but a soul called no longer command. "Where is?" she said simply, and walked past him into the night. Years passed, and the story of Nahuel and Isabel became a kind of whisper carried by the wind. Travelers spoke of a woman who lived by the river, lighting candles at dusk and speaking to the water as if it were alive. Some said they saw her silhouette walking along the cliffs at dawn, her hair loose, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Others claimed that on quiet nights, when the moon was full, a rider could be seen in the distance, a man with long dark hair and a white horse, galloping beside the river bank. They said they never looked back, and she never stopped waiting. The fort fell to ruin over time. The coronel died old and silent, leaving behind a single written confession. He talked to defended honor, but he only defended fear. Father Alonso grew frail, but he never stopped telling their story, not as tragedy, but as revelation. They called him a savage, he would say to anyone who would listen. But he taught us what it means to be human. One evening, as the sun sank into the river, the water turned the color of fire, red, gold, endless. A breeze swept across the valley, carrying a faint sound, half voice, half memory. They called him a savage, y called him Salvation, and in the river, our names became one. And then the wind stilled, and the world, for just a moment, felt forgiven.